Bound to the Billionaire Alpha. Written by Short Story Queen. Chapter 1. The Alpha's Eyes. The city's steel heart never stopped pulsing. Beneath its jagged skyline, New York breathed in fumes, spilled light onto glass towers, and whispered secrets through elevator shafts and corner offices. On the 42nd floor of the Alaric Hotel, where the world's richest oil barons gathered in their spotless suits to broker land and power, something far older than politics stirred. Zara Hale stepped into the conference room 5 minutes before the scheduled start, clutching her notepad and badge in one hand and brushing her coat collar flat with the other. She hated running late. Her black heels clicked softly on marble tile, the sound nearly swallowed by the room's hushed luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows washed everything in slate-gray daylight, diffused through cloud cover thick with the promise of a storm. She'd been hired for one purpose: multilingual interpretation for the upcoming summit between rival conglomerates, including Reyes Energy. It should have been another high-paying week of tightly translated jargon, schmoozing executives, and small talk over overpriced coffee. She hadn't counted on him. At the head of the table, standing with a hand resting casually on a leather chair, was Dominic Reyes. He didn't turn when she entered. Not at first. His head tilted slightly, the way an animal might when catching an unexpected sound. The discussion between three executives dulled, as if even their voices recognized something heavier had just entered the room. Slowly, Dominic straightened, one buttoned cuff brushing his thigh. Then, he looked at her. Their eyes met. The moment was microscopic. Half a second, maybe less. But the silence that followed dragged like gravity. Zara froze mid-step. He didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't offer a polite nod, like the others had. He simply looked, and in that stare there was no charm, no welcome, only raw assessment, as if something in her scent triggered a response he wasn't prepared for. Not fear, something darker. Recognition. Zara moved again, forcing her legs to carry her to her assigned seat halfway down the table. She didn't look back. She felt the heat of his gaze burn between her shoulder blades, even after she sat. The introductions resumed. Names passed around like currency. Zara heard them all, repeated some in 3 languages for the translator headset check, and answered 2 technical questions with perfect composure. But her skin wouldn't settle. He was too quiet, too still. Even seated, Dominic Reyes looked like something ready to move. His navy suit fit like it had been stitched to the lines of his body. His jaw held tension in all the wrong places. And those eyes, blue so deep they were almost black, flicked toward her every time someone else spoke. She'd interpreted for dozens of billionaires, from oil barons to arms dealers. Power had a shape, and Dominic Reyes wore it like second skin. But there was something unnatural about how his presence filled the room. It wasn't charisma, it was closer to gravity, and she had the uneasy sensation that the air around him obeyed different rules. When the session adjourned for a 15-minute break, Zara rose quickly and moved toward the refreshments, needing space to breathe. She poured coffee slowly, just to buy time. She didn't look up, not until she felt it again. That pull, subtle but immediate, like a rope brushing against the soul. He stood behind her. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that his scent curled into her senses. Clean smoke, something like rain, hitting hot earth. Her hand trembled slightly on the cup. "Miss Hale," he said. His voice was deeper than she'd expected, measured, impossibly calm. It was the voice of a man who didn't speak unless the world bent to listen. She turned with a neutral smile. Mr. Reyes. He watched her. Not her face, not her body. Her eyes, as if searching through them for something hidden just beneath the surface. You've worked with Westcore before, he said. It wasn't a question. I have. And Valente Petro? Yes. Your resume suggests you specialize in hostile negotiations. I specialize in complex negotiations. His mouth lifted slightly at one corner. Not a smile, a flicker of something else. Interest, approval, hunger. I imagine you've seen a lot of wolves in boardrooms, he said. Her stomach tensed, just slightly. I wouldn't call anyone names. Names don't offend me. He tilted his head again, ever so slightly. But instincts, those are harder to ignore. Something in her chest reacted. A jolt, sharp and fast, like her heartbeat had stuttered and caught on something invisible. Her skin rose in gooseflesh. She sipped her coffee to mask it. Is that why you were watching me? She asked. He didn't flinch. I was curious, he said. That wasn't the word for what had passed between them. Not curiosity, not even attraction. It felt like a door had opened, no, ripped open, and something on the other side had come hurtling through. Something ancient, something hers. He stepped back. The weight of his attention lifted, just enough to breathe again. Enjoy the summit, Miss Hale, he said, turning without waiting for a response. She stood there too long after he walked away, her coffee now cold in her hand. From across the room, she felt Roman Vale watching her. Dominic's second, though she didn't know his name yet. His expression held no friendliness, only calculation, like he was trying to solve an equation that didn't make sense. Zara made her way back to her seat. Her skin still tingled. Her thoughts refused to settle. She didn't believe in fate, or wolves, or instinct. But deep in her chest, something old had begun to stir. Not a feeling, a presence, not her own. And it whispered in a voice not quite hers. He found us. Chapter 2. Scent of the Forbidden. The rain came in softly that evening, coating the city in a silver sheen that blurred lights and washed away edges. Zara sat in the back of a sleek black car, the cityscape reflected across the window as her driver merged into traffic. She didn't speak. She didn't move much. The meeting had ended hours ago, but the man at the head of the table lingered in her thoughts like perfume on skin, unwanted but impossible to ignore. Dominic Reyes. She'd tried to shake off the strange heaviness from their first encounter, chalking it up to jet lag and too much caffeine. But her body disagreed. It hadn't stopped buzzing since he spoke to her. Not in fear, not in desire, but in something else. Something without a name. The way he'd looked at her. As if she were not a person, but a question. A puzzle piece he'd spent his life missing and had just now found in the shape of her eyes. It made no sense. She was nobody to him. A contractor, a translator, a brief presence. And yet, a chill slid along her spine, not cold. Something inside. Something that wasn't there before the meeting. A tremor in the bones. The car stopped at the entrance of the hotel. As she stepped into the marble lobby, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror between the elevators. Her copper hair slightly damp from the mist. Eyes a little too wide. Get a grip, Zara. She rode the elevator up in silence, rubbing her fingers absently against her palms. The sensation hadn't faded. It was worse now. Sharper, like pressure building beneath her skin. She unlocked the door to her suite and stepped into darkness. flicking on the low golden lamp beside the sofa. Her phone buzzed on the marble desk, a message from the summit coordinator. Mr. Reyes has requested a brief private meeting, 9:30 p.m., suite 4401, confidential, optional. Her thumb hovered over the screen. It was already past 8. She told herself it was curiosity that made her accept. Suite 4401 was at the very top of the tower, far from the other conference rooms. The elevator required a special keycard to reach the floor, which she received in an envelope from the concierge, marked only with a symbol she didn't recognize. 2 wolves, back to back. She entered the hallway alone. It was quiet, in a way that felt intentional. Suite 4401's door opened before she could knock. Dominic stood there, dressed in black. No tie, no blazer. The sleeves of his shirt rolled neatly to the forearms, exposing veined hands and the curve of muscle that suggested quiet strength. Behind him, the room was dim, lit only by a few wall sconces and the dull shimmer of city lights pouring through vast windows. "Come in," he said, voice low. She hesitated, but only for a moment. The door shut behind her with a click. No assistance, no distractions, just him. He gestured toward a chair near the window, where 2 glasses and a crystal decanter waited, half filled with amber. She didn't sit. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "You weren't sure, or you didn't care." His mouth twitched, but not with humor. He stepped closer, just enough for her to catch that scent again. Smoke and storm, and something older, something almost wild. "I don't ask for things I don't care about, Miss Hale." She folded her arms. "Why am I here?" Dominic studied her, not her posture or her clothes, but her. Like he was reading pages no one else could see. Then, without a word, he moved past her and poured 2 glasses. "I've lived a long time in this city," he said quietly, "and I've seen everything, every lie, every scheme, every threat in a $1,000 suit. But today—" He turned, eyes locked on hers. "Something unfamiliar walked into my world, and I felt it the moment you did." Her fingers curled against her side. "I'm not unfamiliar," she said. "I'm a translator." "You're not just a translator," he said, stepping toward her again. "You don't feel like one. You don't smell like one." Zara froze. "Excuse me?" Dominic didn't blink. He moved closer. "There's something in your blood," he said, voice deep, almost hushed. "It's not human. Not completely. I don't know how you've hidden it, or how you haven't noticed." Her laugh came, dry and nervous. "You've got the wrong woman." "No," he said. "I have the right one. That's the problem." The silence between them thickened, humming with something charged. Her skin tingled again, like it did in the conference room, but worse now, sharper, deeper. He looked at her like a man on the edge of instinct, trying to hold it back with sheer force of will. Zara took a step backward. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Mr. Reyes, but—" "Dominic." She stopped. He didn't ask. He corrected her, and she realized he wasn't pretending. He believed every word. "You should leave," he said, voice low. "Now, before I change my mind." Her breath caught, not in fear, in confusion, because despite the warning, his eyes burned with a kind of pull that dared her to stay. She turned toward the door, then paused. "What exactly do you think I am?" He didn't answer at first. Then, finally, a whisper. A bond I didn't ask for. Her hand was on the doorknob when she felt it, like a pulse behind her ribs, in her ribs. A soundless vibration. Not hers, something else, someone else. A voice that didn't speak, but curled into her awareness like smoke. He knows. He's one of us. Zara froze. The world tilted. The lamp buzzed softly. Her own breath sounded too loud in the quiet. She didn't turn back, didn't speak. She simply walked out the door and down the hallway, faster than she meant to, palms damp and heartbeat wrong. In the elevator, she finally exhaled. Not human, not completely. He couldn't be serious. But deep beneath the fear and disbelief, one question rooted itself inside her like a thorn. What if he was? Chapter 3. A beast. Beneath the suit. The morning after didn't come with sunlight, only fog, thick, heavy, and unmoving, like the city itself had decided to hold its breath. Zara woke before her alarm, tangled in sheets that felt too warm, as if her body had been fighting something in her sleep. The dream had followed her down into rest, like a shadow. Glimpses of a forest she didn't recognize, breathless running through trees, slick with moonlight, and the steady sound of something following her. Not footsteps, pause. A low growl, not of fear, but possession. She rubbed the sleep from her face and sat at the edge of the bed, feet touching cool marble tile. There was no comfort in waking, only questions. The night before with Dominic had cracked something open in her. Not belief exactly, but awareness. Awareness of how close she'd been standing to something she didn't understand. She didn't believe in wolves or bloodlines or whatever fantasy he'd been spinning in that suite. But her body remembered. Her skin still tingled in places his voice had touched. And that whisper, "He's one of us," echoed with the kind of clarity dreams never had. Zara dressed quickly and checked her phone. No new messages, no follow-up meeting, as if nothing had happened. But something had. She could feel it in her bones. The summit resumed at 10. The elevator ride was long and silent, filled with tight-lipped executives and stale cologne. Zara stood near the corner, arms crossed, eyes on the floor numbers ticking upward. She didn't dare glance at the others. Not even when Dominic Reyes stepped in without a word, his presence shifting the air like a storm front. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her, but she knew he felt it too. The conference room looked no different. Same cold glass walls, same sculpted perfection. But Zara saw things differently now. She noticed how people moved around Dominic, respectfully, cautiously, like prey orbiting something with sharper teeth. She watched the way Roman veil lingered near the windows, always positioned with a view of both the door and Dominic, not as a subordinate, as a sentinel. The meeting began with a tense negotiation between rival factions, both pressing for access to a disputed oil field. Zara translated efficiently, but her focus split. Something about the tone of the room had shifted. Polite smiles felt thinner. The tension wasn't just professional, it was territorial. And Dominic, while silent for most of it, radiated an intensity that set every hair on her arms upright. The moment came quietly. No warning, no obvious trigger. A slip in tone from one of the Valente delegates, something veiled and sharp about old dynasties losing their bite. The kind of corporate jab meant to sting pride, not draw blood. But it did more than that. Zara saw it. The flicker. Dominic didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. A flicker of silver, barely visible. Gone in less than a breath, and the air changed. Not metaphorically, literally. The temperature in the room dropped. The hairs on Zara's neck rose. Roman tensed in the corner, stepping forward instinctively before catching himself. Dominic exhaled once, slow, controlled. His voice, when it came, was measured. "I'd advise you," he said, eyes locked on the delegate, "to remember who still holds the northern fields, and what I do to those who forget." The silence that followed was not polite. It was fear. Zara translated without a stumble, but her heart beat harder than it should have. She couldn't take her eyes off him. The man who spoke like winter, who controlled a room not with charm, but with something older, an aura of absolute authority. She remembered how close she'd stood to him the night before, how his breath had touched her collarbone, how he had warned her to leave, not out of arrogance, but protection. The meeting ended early. Too much tension, too many veiled threats. As people filtered out, Zara remained seated longer than she needed to, pretending to organize notes. She watched Dominic speak quietly with Roman, both of them angled toward the door, heads close. There was something unspoken in their interaction, a rhythm that didn't require words. Then Dominic turned. His gaze found hers, like it was inevitable. Not curious, not charming, claiming. And in that instant, the thing inside her, the presence that had stirred in the elevator, pushed forward. Not violently, but with hunger. "He's not hiding what he is anymore," it whispered. Zara stood too quickly and exited before her own legs betrayed her. She didn't make it far. She turned a corner into the hallway leading toward the east exit, hoping for air, for quiet. Instead, she was met by the sharp edge of someone's shoulder as they rounded the bend. Hard, deliberate. A man she didn't recognize. Expensive suit, no badge. He looked at her the way men sometimes looked at lone women on empty streets. But his smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're the translator," he said. Zara stepped sideways, back toward the wall. "Excuse me." He stepped in her path again. "I'm just curious," he said. "What's so special about your voice that Dominic Reyes asked for you by name? I think you have me confused with someone else." "I don't think I do." There was a heat in his gaze that wasn't human. It was wrong and close. Too close. But before she could say another word, he was gone. Not pushed, not tackled, simply removed. 1 second he stood there, too close, too dangerous, and the next, he was slammed against the opposite wall, with a force so fast it didn't register until the sound echoed down the hallway. Dominic held him there, one hand on the man's collar, the other curled into a fist by his side. No words, no expression. The threat was clear. Zara couldn't move. The man choked out a few muttered words, trying to apologize, explain. Dominic didn't hear them. He leaned in, close to the man's ear, and said something low enough she couldn't hear. Then he stepped back, released his grip, and let the man crumple to the floor. He didn't even look at Zara. He just walked away. Like the beast had surfaced, done what it came to do, and returned to the cage. She didn't follow. She didn't call out. But something deep inside her stirred again, sharper this time. Less whisper, more promise. He's protecting what's his. Chapter 4. The Mark. By the time Zara returned to her room, her hands still trembled. Not from fear, at least not the kind she could name, but from something more visceral, more alive. The hallway incident played on repeat in her mind. The stranger's hand grazing her arm, the unwelcome nearness, and then Dominic, striking fast without hesitation, like violence was an instinct, not a decision. She hadn't seen a man. She had seen a predator, a protector. She closed the door to her suite and stood in the dark for a moment, chest tight, unsure whether she should sit, scream, or laugh. Her reflection in the window looked unfamiliar. Flushed, hair slightly out of place. Her lips parted like she'd been caught mid-confession. She barely remembered falling asleep. Her body gave in long before her mind did. The dream came again. But this time, it wasn't just breathless running or strange forests. This time, she wasn't alone. He was there. Not Dominic exactly, but something wearing his shape, taller, broader, covered in silver-black fur that gleamed like midnight oil. His eyes glowed faintly, not blue anymore, but molten gold, and his voice reached her not through sound, but through knowing. You are mine. She awoke gasping. Light poured through the curtains, gray and cold, but welcome. Her skin felt tight, like it had been stretched overnight, and her palms were warm in a way that made no sense. She sat up slowly, pressing them flat against the sheets. That's when she saw it. A mark. Barely there, just beneath the skin on the inside of her right wrist, like an old burn or a birthmark she'd never noticed before. A pattern almost, crescent-shaped, subtle, but unmistakable. Her breath caught. She touched it. It didn't hurt, but it pulsed with heat the moment her fingers brushed it. A quiet pulse, like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. No, not possible. She stood quickly, heading for the bathroom mirror. She held up her wrist, turning it toward the light. It didn't look new. It looked ancient, like it had waited for years, maybe longer, to rise to the surface. The shape felt deliberate, familiar somehow. The kind of thing one might find carved into stone or inked onto old parchment. She tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just stress, a sleep-induced hallucination, her body's response to adrenaline and proximity. She'd been through intense contracts before, tight deadlines, dangerous men. But none of them had left marks on her skin or her mind. Her phone buzzed. A short message. No sender listed. Only a location and a time. Room 9C. 1 hour. Don't bring questions. She stared at the screen for a moment, unsure whether to ignore it or run from it. But curiosity was a kind of gravity, and whatever was pulling her, it had already won. Room 9C wasn't part of the hotel's main floors. It was a sub-level, half-forgotten, likely intended for staff or private meetings, not listed on the usual directories. The hallway was dim, quiet. There were no guards, no cameras, just a single heavy door that opened before she touched it. The woman inside was older, seated at a long wooden table with a bowl of water at its center. Her skin was pale, her dark hair streaked with silver, and her eyes, almost entirely white, didn't blink as Zara entered. She didn't ask Zara to sit, but her presence left no room for standing. "You came," the woman said, voice low and rasped, like leaves brushing stone. Zara hesitated. "Who are you?" The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she dipped 2 fingers into the bowl and stirred. Ripples moved outward, unnaturally slow. "Your blood," she murmured, "has been sleeping a long time." Zara didn't speak. "Your father's line was from the northern wilds, old blood, feral, proud. Your mother, southern pack, faded power, diluted. They tried to raise you away from it, to keep you from the truth. But blood doesn't forget itself." "This is insane." The woman's pale eyes lifted. and yet the mark has appeared. Zara looked down, instinctively pulling her sleeve down over the wrist. The Alpha knows, the woman said softly. He smelled it before you did. Zara's stomach turned. I don't believe in any of this. You don't need to, the woman replied. Belief isn't required, only awakening. Silence filled the room, then more quietly. He hasn't marked you. Not yet, but the bond is already forming. Zara swallowed hard. And if I don't want it? The woman's face didn't change, but her voice did. Then run. And run well. Because if he doesn't claim you by moonrise, the bond turns inward. The wolf doesn't disappear. It goes mad. Zara stood. You people are insane. The woman didn't move. She only dipped her fingers again, water now darkening, clouding like smoke. Do you feel it yet? She whispered. The pull beneath your ribs, the sound that isn't sound, the voice that isn't yours. Zara turned and walked out without replying. But as she slammed the door behind her and stepped into the hallway, the silence screamed back at her, and deep beneath her skin, the mark pulsed again. She didn't go to the summit that afternoon. She needed space, air, reality. She left the building entirely, walking with no real destination, weaving through crowds and noise and streetlight haze until she found herself on a quiet bench in a city park. Autumn leaves scattered around her feet. The wind was sharp. The world at last felt real again. Until the air changed, not temperature, not scent, pressure. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. Dominic sat beside her without asking. He didn't speak. Neither did she. The silence between them was the only thing that felt honest. And after a while, she turned her wrist just slightly, pulling back the sleeve. He saw it. The mark. For a moment, his breath caught, so faintly that no one else would have noticed. His jaw tensed, his hands curled around his knees. Still, he didn't speak, but she could feel it. The bond between them, no longer a question, a fact. Unavoidable, dangerous, unspoken. She didn't know what it meant yet. But the silence between them had changed shape. It was no longer about what was unsaid. It was about what could no longer be denied. Chapter 5. The first shift. The sun had long since vanished behind the city's skyline by the time Zara made it back to the hotel. Shadows cut deeper between the buildings. Street lamps flickered in a pattern she couldn't shake off, like some unseen rhythm pulsing beneath the concrete. Everything felt sharper now. The scent of rain in the air, the shift in temperature with every turn she took, the subtle way people looked at her as though something inside her had changed. Because something had. She couldn't stop rubbing her wrist. The mark remained faint, but undeniable, warm against the cool air. No matter how many times she told herself it wasn't real, that it couldn't be real, her body refused to forget. She could still feel the way Dominic had looked at her in the park. Not surprised, not triumphant, but grim. As if he had known this moment would come. As if he had been dreading it. Or worse, waiting. The elevators were too quiet, her floor too still. The moment she entered her suite, she bolted the door behind her and leaned against it, eyes closed. But rest didn't come. Instead, a wave of something unfamiliar rolled through her. It wasn't pain, not exactly, but discomfort born of displacement. A shifting, slow and deep, like her bones were considering a new shape. She dropped her bag and crossed to the window, breathing in the sharp smell of ozone just as thunder rolled in the distance. The storm she'd felt coming for days had finally arrived, and so had something else. A knock came, not at the door, at her mind. Not a sound, not a voice, a presence, as though someone had leaned too close without touching her. Her breath caught. You need to leave. The thought wasn't hers, but it sounded inside her like an echo, familiar, male, and filled with urgency. Now. Go. Now. The knock came again, this time at the actual door. 3 short raps. Then silence. She didn't move. She barely breathed. Another knock. Firmer. She stepped back slowly, heart thudding, unsure if it was panic or instinct, or if there was any difference now. Her fingers hovered over her phone, but she didn't dial. She knew who was on the other side, not Dominic. Not this time. A voice spoke through the door, low and male. Different accent, smoother. You've been marked. That makes you valuable. She swallowed. The handle jiggled once, calm, testing. You don't know what you are, but someone else does, and you're not safe with him. Zara backed away. The mark on her wrist flared with heat again, but this time it wasn't protective. It was warning. The lock snapped. The door slammed open. She didn't scream. There was no time. The man stepped in without hesitation, his movements clean and rehearsed. Not a suit this time. Black tactical wear, thin gloves. His eyes weren't glowing, but they didn't need to. She could feel what he was. Something not entirely human. A wolf, but wrong. Don't make this difficult, he said. She ran. The suite wasn't large, but instinct drove her. She slipped around the bed, grabbed the lamp, hurled it toward the door. It shattered, buying her only seconds. He was already moving again. Then the lights went out. The room plunged into black. And that's when she heard it. A snarl. Deep. Violent. Close. Not the intruder. Behind him. A second shadow collided with the man in black, and the sound that followed wasn't human at all. Growling, bones cracking, furniture splintering beneath their weight. Zara dropped to the floor, heart pounding as the two figures clashed, teeth flashing in brief shards of moonlight through the broken window. Something heavy slammed into the dresser, and the stranger hit the floor hard. For a heartbeat, silence. Then a shape rose from the darkness. Massive, wolven. Dominic, but not the man she knew. The creature standing over the intruder was something primal, covered in sleek, near-black fur, shoulders broad enough to fill the frame of the broken window, claws curved and dripping with rainwater. His chest heaved, eyes glowing gold and locked on the threat. And then he moved. With terrifying grace, Dominic crossed the room and lifted the intruder off the ground in a single movement. No words, just a growl so low it vibrated in the floor beneath her. The man gasped once. Then Dominic threw him through the window. Glass exploded outward in a rain of sound. The man disappeared into the storm below. Zara stared, too stunned to speak. The wolf turned to her. Not aggressively, but slowly, deliberately. And for the first time she wasn't afraid. Her instincts screamed that she should be. But something deeper silenced the panic. She knew that whatever this creature was, it wouldn't hurt her. Not now, not ever. He took a step closer, another. Rain soaked his fur where the storm blew through the broken window, and every breath he took seemed heavier now. Strained. Zara reached out, unsure what she was doing. Her fingers brushed his arm, Heat met skin. The fur beneath her hand was softer than it looked, warm and vibrating with power. His breath caught. Then slowly, grindingly, he shifted. Not all at once. She watched it happen. Bones reshaping, fur pulling back into skin, muscles rippling as he stood tall again. Naked now, except for the streaks of blood and rain down his arms. But it wasn't the body she stared at. It was the change. It wasn't just a man becoming a wolf. It was something ancient waking up, claiming space, claiming her. He looked at her then, fully himself again, and for once, he didn't hide anything. No mask, no restraint, only one truth. "I warned you," Dominic said, voice raw, "but I couldn't stay away." She didn't speak, because neither could she. Chapter 6. The Bonding Moon. The storm didn't pass. It settled. Heavy rain fell like it had roots in the sky, soaking the city in endless waves. The sirens were distant now, muffled by the thunder, but Zara could still hear the quiet chaos left behind. Glass littered the floor of her suite, twisted shards catching reflections of the dim city lights outside. She stood barefoot in the wreckage, heart thudding, air still thick with the scent of ozone and blood, and something distinctly, irrevocably Dominic. He hadn't said another word after shifting back. He hadn't needed to. She sat on the edge of the bed, dazed, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Dominic had turned away after the transformation, giving her space. But even without facing her, he filled the room like smoke, clinging to everything, making it impossible to breathe without inhaling him. He stood now at the broken window, bare back to her, rain slicing across his skin. His silence wasn't cold, just controlled, like he was containing something with effort, something wild. She found her voice barely. "How long have you been like this?" He didn't turn. "Since I was 13. The answer landed like a stone in still water. She blinked. "How did you know about me?" "I didn't." He paused. "Not until I scented you." She exhaled slowly, a strange ache curling in her stomach. Not fear, not even shock anymore, just the weight of a new reality. "This mark," she whispered, brushing the inside of her wrist. "What does it mean?" Dominic turned finally. His face was unreadable. There was still a wildness behind his eyes, tempered, but not gone. "It means you're mine," he said. Then, after a breath, "Fated." She flinched at the word, not because she didn't believe it now, but because of how absolute it sounded. A verdict, not a choice. "I didn't agree to anything." His jaw tightened. "You didn't have to." Zara stood then, wrapping the blanket tighter, as she crossed to the window, stopping a few feet from him. The wind tugged at the edges of her hair, the scent of petrichor thick in the air. She looked up at him, not afraid, not angry, but searching. "There's something inside me," she said softly. "Something that wasn't there before. Or maybe it always was, and now it's waking up." His eyes dropped to her wrist. The bond's forming. It's instinctual, deeper than thought. "And if I don't want it?" A beat of silence. "Then it'll consume you," he said, "or kill you. That's what happens when a bond is left untethered. One of us breaks, or both." Her breath caught. "But I'm not trying to take anything from you, Zara. I didn't choose this any more than you did." "But you want it," she whispered. His gaze snapped back to hers, and something flickered there, feral, possessive. "Yes," he said, "more than I've ever wanted anything." She looked away, fingers trembling at her side. Then why haven't you taken it? Dominic stepped closer. Not to touch her, just enough for her to feel the heat of him, the weight of his presence. Because when I claim you, he said, voice rough, low, it won't be because the bond forces you. It'll be because you want it too. Her stomach twisted, sharp with conflict. She wanted to scream at him for the impossibility of it all, for dragging her into a world she never asked to be part of. And yet, her body didn't pull away. Her skin remembered his touch. Her dreams still echoed with the sound of paws on wet earth, the shape of something massive and silver beside her. He stepped past her, toward the shattered door. I'm taking you to my estate, he said without turning around. You're not safe here. She stiffened. You don't get to order me around. He stopped, looked back. I'm not asking. Their eyes locked, and she knew. He didn't mean it as dominance. He meant it as protection. But still, she hated how easily her defiance folded under that stare. He offered her his coat. She didn't want to take it, but she did. The drive upstate was long and silent, the kind of silence that wasn't awkward, just loaded. Zara kept her gaze fixed on the road ahead, even as the trees thickened and the city lights fell away behind them. The storm had thinned by then, but the clouds remained low, full of tension. Dominic's estate sat hidden in the folds of the Catskill Mountains, far from traffic and maps. When the gates opened and the car rolled down the long gravel path, she understood why. The house wasn't modern. It was ancient. Stone and iron, twisted vines curling over weathered walls, lit by soft golden lamps. It didn't look built. It looked grown, like something pulled from the soil itself. Inside, the space was warm, quiet. Wood beams, low fires, not lavish like a billionaire's mansion, more like a fortress disguised as a home. You'll stay here, Dominic said, guiding her toward a high-ceilinged guest wing. There are guards on the perimeter. No one gets in without my say. She stopped in the hallway. I'm not your prisoner. He looked down at her, face unreadable. No, he said. You're my responsibility. Their eyes met again, and for a second she saw it. Just beneath the cold authority, the wolf pacing in his chest, waiting, holding back. What happens now? She asked. Dominic didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked away, his voice trailing just before he vanished into the shadows of the hall. The moon's rising tomorrow. You'll feel it. And she already did. Not in her skin, but in her soul. Chapter 7. Rival Blood. The moon rose the next night, full and pale and watching. It spilled light through the forest that surrounded Dominic's estate, painting silver over the moss-covered stones and the winding paths that led into the trees. Zara stood by the tall windows of the east wing, eyes fixed on the sky, unsure if she was being pulled toward it or warned by it. The pull beneath her skin had grown worse, like a second heartbeat pulsing in quiet rebellion against everything she thought she was. Her sleep had turned restless, thick with dreams of running and chasing and hunger. She didn't speak of it, not even to Dominic, who kept his distance with practiced discipline. But in every hallway, in every room where their paths crossed, she felt the unspoken tension rise. It was in the way he looked at her, not with the cold precision of a CEO, but with a quiet torment, like a man restraining something that wanted, needed, to break through. She'd asked no questions, but answers came anyway. They arrived on horseback, emerging from the woods in silence, 5 riders, each dressed in deep gray leathers, the sigil of their pack stitched into their shoulders, a wolf's head crowned in bone. Zara watched them approach from the window above, unaware of what was about to unfold, but already sensing the change in the air. Dominic met them in the clearing behind the estate, where the ceremonial stones stood in a half-circle of ancient black rock, weathered and older than the house itself. Zara followed at a distance, led silently by Roman through the halls and down the stone stairwell that opened to the outer grounds. There were no words exchanged, no welcome offered, only the weight of what was coming. At the center of the clearing stood a woman, Sloane Reyes. Zara didn't need an introduction. The resemblance was subtle, but unmistakable. Dominic's blood ran through her, sharper and wilder. Where Dominic held his power beneath layers of control, Sloane wore hers like a crown of thorns. Her eyes were molten gold, not softened by restraint, but sharpened by it. She moved like someone born to be feared. Zara stepped into the clearing, feet crunching over wet leaves, the sky above them silent, but expectant. Sloane turned, and their eyes met. No smile, no greeting, only appraisal, cold and exact. This wasn't a conversation, it was a reckoning. The wolves circled slowly, keeping to the edge of the stone. Roman remained behind Zara, watchful but still. Dominic stood off to the side, arms crossed, silent. Zara wanted to ask what was happening, but the answer was already forming inside her. She could feel it in the way the others watched her. She didn't belong here. Not yet. Not in their eyes. This was a test, not of strength, but of worth. Sloane stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture. She simply walked until there was barely a breath between them, and then she reached out and touched Zara's wrist. The mark flared. Zara gasped, the heat shooting through her arm and into her chest. Sloane didn't flinch. She let her fingers linger, studying the reaction like a scientist observing a specimen. "This is real," she said, almost bored. Then she turned toward the circle. "She's marked, but not proven." The others nodded slowly, one by one, in some silent accord. Zara's chest tightened. Dominic said nothing. He didn't interrupt, because he couldn't. Roman stepped beside her, voice low enough for her ears alone. "She's invoking the right of challenge." Zara didn't understand the words, not fully, but the meaning sank into her like cold water. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a trial. Sloane walked to the edge of the circle, shedding her long coat in one smooth motion. Beneath, she wore the ceremonial black of the old bloodlines, woven leather etched with sigils Zara couldn't read, symbols that pulsed faintly beneath the moonlight. Zara stood frozen. No one moved to stop this. No one spoke up in protest, not even Dominic, because this wasn't a negotiation. This was tradition. Zara stepped forward, not because she wanted to, but because something inside her refused to retreat. The wolves backed away, giving the circle space. The air grew heavier, thick with anticipation and primal weight. The mark on her wrist burned, the sensation crawling up her arm, like fire beneath the skin. Her hands trembled, but she did not fall. Sloane's body shifted, not in pain, not with struggle. She embraced the change. Fur erupted across her limbs, her body stretching, contorting, until the human form gave way to the monstrous. A silver-gray wolf, lean and long-limbed, stood where she had been, eyes locked on Zara, with the focused hunger of a predator. Zara stood alone. She felt the others watching, judging. Her blood pounded in her ears. And then something inside her moved. "Let me out." It wasn't a voice. It was older than words, but it echoed inside her like a chime struck in bone. Zara didn't understand it, but she surrendered. Her vision swam, the ground shifted, her hands curled into claws, her spine arched, and her body, her very self, peeled open like a cage being torn apart from the inside. Pain, but not pain. Heat, breath, movement. When her vision cleared, she wasn't looking up at Sloane anymore. She was facing her. Fur bristled along her limbs. Her bones felt new, her teeth sharper. The night air tasted alive. Gasps circled the ring. Someone whispered her name, and then Sloane lunged. Zara met her mid-stride, the collision a blur of muscle and instinct. Teeth flashed, claws raked. She didn't think. She reacted. Somewhere, in the deepest corner of herself, she knew she should be afraid. Knew that she didn't have the experience, the training, the power. But she endured. And when it was over, she stood alone in the ring, panting, body aching, but upright. Sloane lay collapsed beside the stones, not unconscious, just defeated. The circle was silent. Then, one by one, the others lowered their heads, not to her weakness, but to her strength. Zara shifted back slowly, her body trembling from the exertion. Roman was already moving to her side, a dark coat in hand, but she ignored it. Her eyes were locked on Dominic. He hadn't moved, but the look in his eyes said everything. She wasn't just his bond anymore. She had earned the pack. Chapter 8. Blood and fire. The wound on her shoulder hadn't stopped aching, not deep, but sharp. A reminder of teeth, of instinct, of power. Zara stood in front of the tall mirror in the guest chamber, the first rays of dawn barely touching the frost-laced windows. Her body was wrapped in a robe that wasn't hers. Dominic's, she realized, heavier around her shoulders, still carrying the faint scent of him. The mark on her wrist was no longer faint. It had deepened, darkened, like something that had taken root. Her reflection looked unfamiliar now. Not broken, not bruised, changed. Last night's trial lingered in her bones. Not just the pain, but the feeling of stepping beyond a threshold, crossing into something she couldn't step back from. She had stood in a ring of wolves and emerged not as prey, but as something claimed, something dangerous. Her wolf now stirred constantly beneath her skin, a restless echo. The thing she'd spent her life unknowingly silencing had tasted what it meant to be free. It wasn't going back into the cage. A quiet knock came at the door. Not a command, a courtesy. Roman stood in the hall, coat draped over one arm, dark expression fixed as usual. He didn't offer small talk, only a single sentence. "He's waiting." Dominic had kept his distance all night. She hadn't seen him after the trial ended, after her body had given out, and she'd collapsed into Roman's arms. No words, no congratulations, just silence. Until now. She followed Roman down the winding hallway that opened into the eastern wing of the estate. Older, quieter. The walls here bore symbols carved directly into stone, worn down by time and weather. She could feel them under her skin, humming faintly. Her blood responded to them. Dominic stood by the hearth when she entered. The fire was low, casting orange-gold flickers across his bare arms, his shirt discarded, his back to her. He didn't speak immediately, but he knew she was there. "I told you the trial would be dangerous," he said. "I know." You didn't have to accept it. I know that too. He turned slowly. The firelight caught the sharp edge of his jaw, the hollow of his throat. There were old scars on his side, marks she hadn't seen before. Not recent, not shallow. Proof of battles no one in the city boardrooms would ever see. His eyes met hers, tired, but clearer than they had been in days. She chose the challenge because she needed to humiliate me, he said. You just happened to be the method. She lost. She'll try again. Zara didn't respond right away. Instead, she crossed the room, her fingers brushing the edge of the fireplace mantel. Her body still ached, but it was the kind of ache that came from survival. I shifted, she said quietly. I didn't think I could. I didn't think I was ready. You weren't. Her head turned sharply toward him. But you did it anyway, Dominic said, because the wolf inside you knew what it was, and what you are. He stepped closer, the space between them narrowing to a breath. You don't need time, Zara. You need truth. She didn't flinch as his hand lifted, fingertips grazing the edge of her wrist. The mark pulsed in response. Heat traveled up her arm and into her chest, but she didn't pull away. I know what this means now, she said. He nodded once. And yet you still haven't run. I tried, she whispered. It's too late. His hand dropped to his side, but the bond remained stretched between them. Tense, magnetic, fragile only in its unspoken edges. And then the door slammed open. Roman reappeared, this time with blood on his collar and no calm in his voice. She's gone, he said. Zara's gone. For a heartbeat, silence. Then Dominic's eyes turned cold. No, he said. She's here. But Roman was already shaking his head. Not her. The other one. Sloane. She broke the boundary. We found 2 guards dead at the north fence. Their throats. Dominic was already moving. The forest had turned red. Not from leaves, from fire. Smoke curled between the trees as Dominic and Roman ran through the undergrowth, their bodies already shifting between breath and motion. Not full wolves. Not yet, but close. Their limbs lengthened, claws formed beneath fingertips, and their vision sharpened to predator clarity. The trail was unmistakable. Blood, burnt wood, and her scent. Zara's. Dominic moved faster, faster than he should have been able to, until the trees broke open into a small clearing just beyond the ceremonial grounds. There, in the middle of the ash and blood, stood Sloane. She was half-shifted, her skin crawling with fur that hadn't settled, her eyes wild and glowing. Beside her, limp in the grass, lay Zara, breathing but unconscious. Dominic didn't pause. He lunged. The clash between them wasn't clean. It was feral. Years of buried rivalry exploded in a single collision, teeth and fists and claws tearing through the air. Sloane screamed something, but it was lost in the sound of flesh against stone. You let her in, she shrieked. You let her take everything, what was meant for me. Dominic didn't speak, because she was wrong. He hadn't let anything happen. Fate hadn't asked his permission. The fire leapt around them as they fought, the trees cracking, the clearing shrinking into a furnace of rage and betrayal. But Sloane was already faltering. Her rage made her reckless. Dominic's control made him precise. He knocked her to the ground, claws at her throat, breath heaving. Roman arrived seconds later, pulling Zara from the edge of the flames, cradling her against his chest. Dominic, he said, it's enough. But Dominic didn't move. because the bond was pulling at him now, violently, desperately. He could feel it unraveling in real time. Zara's pulse was fading. The bond, untethered too long, was breaking. Dominic released Sloane with a final snarl and crossed the clearing to her. She was pale, too still, and in that moment, all the power he had, all the empire he'd built, the pack he ruled, meant nothing. None of it could stop this. But one thing could. He sank to his knees beside her, lifted her gently into his arms, and pressed his forehead to hers. "Don't fight it anymore," he whispered. "Don't hold it back." The mark on her wrist flared, and finally, so did hers. Chapter 9. The Alpha Unleashed. The full moon crested above the tree line like a blade, silver and sharp, slicing through the smoke that still drifted across the ruined clearing. The fires were dying now, but the aftermath clung to everything. The stench of ash, the metallic bite of spilled blood, and the primal silence that followed true violence. Zara stirred in Dominic's arms, breath faint, skin cold. Her pulse fluttered beneath his fingers like something fading, fragile and slipping. But the mark on her wrist, their mark, was glowing now. Dim at first, like embers under frost, then stronger, as if drawn upward by the presence of the moon overhead. Roman stood off to the side, still and watchful, eyes darting between Dominic and Sloane's unconscious form. The pack had yet to arrive, but they would. Word would travel fast. Someone had crossed sacred boundaries. Blood had been spilled on ancestral ground. And now the Alpha knelt, not in defeat, but in something far more dangerous: devotion. Zara exhaled. Not a gasp, not a scream, just breath, soft and sure. The bond had snapped into place, somewhere in the invisible space between her skin and soul. It hummed through Dominic like current, warm, grounding, unrelenting. His instincts surged, demanding he mark her fully, claim her in the old ways, seal what fate had started. But he didn't move. He only held her. Because the wolf in him had finally stopped pacing. They carried her back to the estate, just before sunrise. Roman cleared the north wing for quiet, and guards doubled their rounds along the perimeter. No one challenged Dominic as he passed. Half shifted still, blood streaking his chest, his jaw clenched against the rising edge of fury. Sloane had fled in the confusion, her broken pride more dangerous now than ever. Zara rested in the east wing, wrapped in blankets, her body still mending. Her wounds weren't deep, but the transformation, her second, this time unforced, had taken its toll. Her wolf had risen too fast, without warning, pulled from its cage by fear and instinct, and now it slept, buried deep in her skin, but no longer dormant. Dominic sat nearby, silent. He hadn't left her side since returning. The moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting soft lines across her face. She looked peaceful, unaware of the chaos surrounding her. But he wasn't. He felt it building. The bond had settled, but it wasn't enough. Not with enemies still moving in the shadows, not with Sloane alive and burning for revenge, and not with the Silver Accord, them especially, circling his territory like vultures. He had underestimated the threat. No more. The council met the following night under the stone archway, hidden beneath the estate, a relic of older times, where wolves once gathered in full form beneath open sky. Only a few remained now. The others had long since bent themselves into the shapes of men, hiding their instincts behind silk and concrete. Dominic walked into the circle without ceremony. The council quieted. Roman stood at his flank, arms crossed, face unreadable. The elders waited. No one spoke, until one did. "She carries your mark," the elder said, "but she's untrained, untested." "She survived the trial," Dominic replied. "She was nearly killed by your sister." "She still survived." The elder hesitated. Another voice, older, colder, cut in from the far end of the chamber. "A bond incomplete can be broken. The Silver Accord has done it before. You know this." Dominic's expression didn't shift. "They can try." "But she's not from a known bloodline." "She is now." Silence again. The old wolves looked between each other. Whispers traveled fast in these halls. The fire, the trial, the mark, the bond, and the prophecy. An alpha who bonded under a blood moon would bring either unity or war. Dominic made no threats. He didn't raise his voice. He only stood still, the weight of power sitting across his shoulders like a mantle, forged in silence. "She's mine," he said. No one argued after that. When Zara woke, it was well after nightfall. The room smelled of cedarwood and firelight, and her skin felt warm, her senses sharp. Not alarmed, just aware. Like something new had clicked into place, and the world no longer seemed quite as heavy. She sat up slowly. Her body no longer trembled. Her limbs obeyed. The ache was gone. But her mind was different, clearer. The wolf inside her wasn't silent anymore. It rested, but not in hiding. It waited. She stood and crossed to the window, staring into the endless night beyond the trees. She didn't know what time it was, didn't care, because she could feel him, Dominic, before he knocked, before he opened the door, before he stepped into the room. The bond told her he was close. He said nothing at first, just stood in the doorway, eyes searching hers for something he wasn't sure he had the right to look for. She didn't run, didn't ask questions, didn't flinch when he stepped closer and lifted her wrist between his fingers. The mark had changed again, not glowing, but settled, final. Claimed. He pressed his lips to it, not for ceremony, not for dominance, but as a vow, one she didn't need to hear to believe. The silence stretched between them, no longer made of tension, but of understanding. The danger wasn't gone. The world outside was still blood and politics and power games. But between them, something had taken root. Something fierce, something ancient. The bond was complete, and the alpha had awakened. Not just the wolf, but the man willing to fight the world, to protect what was his. Chapter 10. Bound to the Alpha. The estate was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't demand stillness, but invited it. Autumn had moved in fully now. The trees that surrounded the property had turned to flame. Amber, gold, and blood-red leaves rustled in slow waves beyond the windows. The storm had passed, the smoke had faded, and what remained felt not like the end of a war, but the hush that followed a decision long feared and finally made. Zara stood barefoot on the stone terrace, the morning wind tugging gently at the robe she wore, the mark on her wrist bare to the rising sun. It no longer burned, it no longer pulsed, it simply existed, like breath or blood. A truth written beneath her skin. There was peace in her body now, strange and unfamiliar. Not because the world had calmed, far from it. The pack still whispered of Sloane's betrayal. still watched the woods with wary eyes, still spoke of the Silver Accord's interest growing louder across their borders. But for the first time, the noise didn't reach her, because something inside her had settled. Not just the wolf, though it too rested now, curled deep in her core like an ember beneath warm ash, but herself, the part that had always felt displaced, on the edge of things, almost belonging, never quite. She belonged now, and she knew it, without needing to be told. The bond had finished its work, not just between her and Dominic, but within her. The blood had awakened, the instincts had aligned, the ache had turned to strength. She had stopped running. Behind her, the door opened softly. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. She felt him approach the same way the earth feels the sky. Dominic stepped onto the terrace, slower than usual, as though this moment required reverence, not authority, not control, just presence. He stood beside her, silent for a while, his gaze cast over the mountains where the early mist still clung to the valleys. He hadn't worn the mask today. No suit, no title, just a man, with old scars and calloused hands, standing beside the woman fate had bound to him, the Alpha and his mate. But titles no longer mattered. What mattered was the stillness between them, the weight of everything that had happened, and the weight of everything yet to come. Dominic had changed, though not in the way others might hope. He hadn't softened. He was still a man who led with silence, who wore discipline like a second skin. Still a wolf who could command a pack with a glance, who could kill without hesitation if it meant protecting what was his. But something inside him had uncoiled. Not a surrender. A surrendering to her, to the bond, to the part of him that no longer needed to fight instinct, because instinct had chosen her. Zara reached out, not because she needed support, but because connection no longer frightened her. Her fingers slid into his. He didn't speak, he only held on. Long enough for the wind to pass. Long enough for the world to turn a little quieter. And in that silence, something changed again. Not in them, but around them. The house behind them, once so still, now moved with the rhythm of wolves who recognized not just a leader, but a union. Whispers moved through the pack like wildfire. Words carried on the mind link, not of chaos, but of home. The Alpha is claimed, and she is his equal. Zara felt it before she heard it. The shift in loyalty, in reverence, not out of fear, not out of tradition, out of truth. They had earned it, not through dominance, but through survival, through trials that broke others, through wounds and betrayal, and the kind of aching honesty that only comes when two souls meet their match and do not flinch. Dominic brought her hand to his lips. He kissed the place where her mark lived, not to remind her of the bond, but to thank her for it. Later, when the sun dipped low and the fires were lit across the outer courts, the pack gathered, not in suits or weapons, but in their true forms. Wolves padded silently through the grass, old and young, betas and sentinels, circling the heart of the estate, where two stood at the center of it all. Dominic, Alpha, bonded, marked, and Zara, no longer outsider, no longer human, no longer other. She stood beside him, not as something claimed, but as something risen. Together, they faced the moonlight, not with ceremony, not with speeches, just stillness. The pack howled, not in mourning, not in war, but in recognition. And deep within Zara's chest, Her wolf opened its eyes fully for the first time. She didn't shift. She didn't need to. She had already become. Night swallowed the land. But in the high room, where they now stood together, his room, their room, the shadows didn't bring fear. They brought firelight, low, steady, flickering across skin and stone. Dominic brushed his thumb across her cheek, as if still trying to understand that she was real, that after everything, violence, denial, blood, she was here, choosing to stay. Zara leaned into the touch, not to be comforted, to anchor him. Because the alpha who had conquered cities, who had controlled his beast for years with brutal precision, had finally found the one thing he could not control. And he no longer needed to. Fate had given him a bond, but she had given him her heart, and that he would protect for the rest of his life.